But first, March is coming in like a lion, the kind of metaphorical lion that brings blizzards to the eastern seaboard and that could reasonably serve as an apocalyptic mascot of financial doom. Sorry. The stock market closed below 6,800 today, under 7,000. A year ago, it was over 12,000. Driving stocks down was news that we're going to make a fourth try at bailing out a big, boring-sounding company called AIG, once the biggest insurance company in the world. You know how it seems like a huge deal? It is a big deal that we bailed out Citigroup for $50 billion and Bank of America for $45 billion. Well, we have spent triple that already on this company AIG. And now, as of today, they're getting $30 billion more. The thinking is that AIG is such a huge company, and part of what it did was provide insurance to the rest of the financial industry. It's such a big company, it's so intertwined that if AIG collapsed, instantaneous, worldwide financial kablooey. Of course, part of the reason that AIG became so big and the means by which they insured the rest of the industry were patently idiotic, defying common sense financial chicanery made possible only because big parts of the financial market were unregulated. But even though AIG got too big and too interconnected to be allowed to fail through means that maybe ought to put somebody in jail, the fact is, the government thinks they are too big and too interconnected to be allowed to fail, so they're getting another $30 billion in our money. Last quarter, even after all the government money that had already been given to AIG, they lost more money than any other company in any quarter in history ever. They lost more than $60 billion in one quarter. They lost $500,000 a minute, and that was with government help. Now they're going to get $30 billion more. And we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens from the vantage point of a country with a very small stock market. As you may recall, President Obama released his budget last week, a big, ambitious budget including some health care reform and middle-class tax cuts and infrastructure and education spending, a budget that did not lie about war spending. It is a big budget. It reflects a big change from the Bush administration for a country that is in big trouble. The Republican response? Well, take it away, little-known Wisconsin Congressman Paul Ryan.
This is probably the biggest rewrite or transformation of our federal budget since the New Deal. What surprises me most about this budget, though, is that they would bring this out in the middle of a recession.
That's what surprises you about it? Okay, pop quiz here. Why was there a New Deal? What was going on in the country that prompted FDR to introduce the big spending activist government New Deal? Was it that everything was going awesome in the U.S. economy back then? Or was it, what was that thing? The Great Impression, the Great Profession, the Great Jam Session? Something like that? Of course you'd have a New Deal-like budget in a recession. When else would you have it? Yeah. All right, your turn, slightly better-known Republican Congressman Eric Cantor.
What we see in this budget, frankly, is an attempt, again, to try and stimulate the economy through government expenditure.
And President Hoover taught us that can't work. Yeah. Did you know they named the shanty towns of poor and starving Americans in the Depression after Hoover? Hoovervilles. It was sort of an award for Hoover's awesome idea that the government shouldn't stimulate the economy in a depression. Okay, last try. Let's try out the man known as the other senator from Arizona.
It's terrifying in the policy implications as well as mind-boggling in the numbers.
You know, I'm starting to detect a theme here. Apparently, the Republican Party's consensus about the economic crisis is that they would like to see a scaled-back government effort to keep the recession from becoming a depression. Joining us now is Congressman Barney Frank, Democrat of Massachusetts, chair of the House Financial Services Committee. Congressman Frank, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight.
Glad to. Thank you.
Before we get to the budget, I want to get your reaction to today's big, scary economic news. The Dow has not closed this low in about 12 years. How worried should we be that the economic downturn is still turning down, that we haven't hit bottom yet?
Well, we should be very worried, and we should be supportive of the kind of intervention that's necessary to fix it. I mean, here is President Obama, 1 month into a presidency, coping with the terrible problems he inherited from the Bush administration. And, you know, it wasn't just the Bush presidency. It was 6 out of the 8 years of Republican Congress. Look, here's the problem we have, and you know, you were right about the how horrified we have to be about AIG, but there's this fact of of sort of political physics, a solution cannot be more elegant than the problem it's trying to solve. The worse, the messier, the dirtier the problem, the less clean the solution is going to be. I do believe that if President Obama keeps on the path that he's going on, we will come out of this. It's going to take a couple of things. First of all, responding currently. Secondly, putting rules in place. And this is probably the most important thing to do. And there'll be a big party fight over this. We have to put rules in place because you're correct. That it was a total absence of regulation that allowed this to happen. We were told if you leave capital alone, if you don't tax it, you don't regulate it, you don't disturb it, it'll take care of all of us. What it did was unregulated capitalism promoted disaster. So one of the things that you are going to see, I hope before the summer, certainly before the end of the year, is a new set of rules, and those comparisons the Republicans like to make to the New Deal will once again be appropriate. Because just as Franklin Roosevelt regulated the stock market and put an end to the wild abuses that contributed to the Depression, we're going to put some strict regulations on those financial manipulations that caused this crisis.
The current fight right now, of course, will be the budget. The president having introduced his budget on Thursday. The Republicans are complaining about the size of the budget and the size of the deficit. Some are even proposing a spending freeze. The budget doesn't need 60 votes in the Senate to pass. I'm wondering if there will be an effort to try to get Republican votes on board with this budget, or do you think the Democrats will just ignore them this time?
Well, they will try. The budget has tended to be very partisan. And I think, look, bipartisanship is a means. It's not the end. And I think the president may have confused those two. If we can get Republican support, fine. I'm chairman of a committee. I try to get as many votes for something as I can. But you don't trade substance, where there are different issues of principle, for 2 or 3 extra votes. And so if some Republicans want to do this, I think that's a useful thing. On the other hand, you've seen this really astounding reaction. What we've seen is a number of Republican governors. And, Rachel, this is just the most extraordinary and discouraging thing. We've got people who are out of work, and we all acknowledge when you get unemployment this high, there are people out of work, and it is in no way their fault. This is just a bad economy. So what we're doing is providing federal funding to help provide unemployment compensation for people who've been thrown out of work. And you have these brave Republican governors, Governor Jindal, Governor Barber, Governor Sanford of South Carolina. Apparently they're going to show how tough they are by denying adequate compensation to the children of people who are out of work. It's a strange kind of toughness. Their ability to bear the hardships of others may be impressive to them. But when you're dealing with people like that, you can't allow that kind of, I think, distorted view of the world to stop you. So if the Republicans, some Republicans vote with it, that'll be fine. But that budget is a very good budget. It is thoughtful. It deals with important public needs. It responds to the economic needs of the country. And if the Republicans don't want to vote for it, if they'd rather brag about how they deny adequate funding to the kids of somebody who's been out of work, let them do it.
Now, you have proposed cutting the military budget substantially as a means of lowering the deficit for the long term. Why the military budget and why now?
Well, first of all, if we get out of Iraq, that saves us a lot of money. But military spending, let me quote Alan Greenspan, obviously a man with great conservative credentials, who says, military spending is among the least productive spending you can have. And it's very ironic. The conservatives are yelling about 2 things. First of all, the deficit is terrible and the budget's too large. Secondly, we're not spending enough on the military. You spend on the military for what you need. Extra spending on the military on things you don't need is a grave error. By the way, Rachel, you've got a good hypocrisy detector. Turn it on when some of my right-wing colleagues start talking about how we have to keep spending on the military because it's good for jobs. All these arguments you've heard about how the government can't stimulate the economy, how government spending doesn't produce jobs, apparently that doesn't apply to weapons spending. If the government helps build a bridge, if the government provides funds for people who are unemployed and they can then go out and buy things that they need, that apparently doesn't help the economy. But if we build bombers that have as their purpose defeating the Soviet Union in the Cold War, and huge amounts of money is still going for Cold War weapons, somehow that does affect the economy. There's a kind of a weaponized version of Keynes that they're partial to.
Congressman Frank, we're just about out of time. I just have to ask you quickly, do you expect your Democratic colleagues in the House to be supporting you on this? Do you expect political support, or do you think this is the sort of thing that takes a few years to build up support for?
It's going to take a few years, Rachel, because the key is this. We are in a zero-sum situation. We do need to worry about the deficit. If we do things like build a bomber that's to defeat the Soviet Union in the war that's over, one of my favorites is we're going to spend billions of dollars to defend the Czech Republic against Iran. We have a missile system we're asked to spend billions and billions for, and it's to put missile defense in Poland and the Czech Republic, because apparently there is a fatwa that I didn't read in which the Iranians have threatened Prague. It's a waste of money, and it's not only a waste of money, but it's money that will be not available when we want to build bridges or hire police officers or fund schools or provide health care.
Congressman Barney Frank, chair of the House Financial Services Committee, thank you for joining us tonight, sir. I really appreciate it.